This show is part of the RetroZap.com podcast network.
Now, prepare yourselves for a Starships, Sabers, and Scoundrels Special Edition.
Hello, Scoundrels and Star Wars fans, and welcome to this Scoundrels Special Edition. I am your host, Dennis Keithly. Tonight, this is going to be a solo effort, as my friends and co-hosts Jay, Krebs, and Darth Taxus were unable to join me due to scheduling conflicts. We'll be discussing Pirate's Price. I'm going to kind of give you a non-spoiler reaction and then dive into a full spoiler discussion, but it's going to be a quick episode. As for the non-spoiler portion of the discussion, as you would know by just looking at the cover, this is a junior grade novel that focuses on Hondo Ohnaka and his meeting Han Solo and Chewbacca, and then they have a couple adventures on the Millennium Falcon. Overall, I enjoyed this book quite a bit. Hondo is the narrator, first-person narrator for most of the discussion. He speaks just like you would expect Hondo to speak, and if you listen to the audio version of this book, it is read by Jim Cummings, who played Hondo Ohnaka on The Clone Wars and Rebels. And he did a fantastic job. You get the right cadence, you get Hondo's idiosyncrasies and his colloquialisms, the way he talks. I had a great time with that. This adventure is galaxy spanning. We get a few worlds that we're familiar with and some brand new ones. One of the things that really intrigued me about this book was the introduction of a new species called the Pachyphantos. And you can envision them as basically being like elephants, which Pachyphantos, pachyderms, not too much of a stretch, but they're described as having trunks and appendages that would kind of look like elephants' legs. And they end up chasing Hondo around for a while. I really enjoyed the locales. Lou Anders did a great job creating a couple new worlds, as I mentioned already. One planet is it comes off like a giant prairie, and the cities are built on the backs of giant creatures that wander around in herds, and so as a consequence, the layout of the cities would constantly change. And so when you're approaching one of these in a starship, you have to be careful where you're going, and God forbid you get caught underneath the feet of these creatures if you end up on the surface of the planet. So again, just wonderful world building in classic Star Wars style there. There's 3 stories that get on there. There's a long one, which is concerns about how Hondo initially met Han and Chewbacca. And then there is a shorter story in the middle that is a team up with Maz Kanata, which is a lot of fun. And then the final story is a post-Last Jedi story, and it features the Porgs. They're all fun stories. None of them I would consider the cream of Star Wars storytelling, but it's fun, and it's a junior grade novel, so keep that in mind when you're reading it. But for me, the getting to experience something from Hondo's point of view and listening to him tell the story is what makes this great. So that's my non-spoiler review. This is an A story. It's fun. It's a quick read. I think I got it done in a few hours during my commute to and from work on the train. So it's not going to take a ton of your time to invest in it. If you don't want to read the book, you'll have a great time listening to Jim Cummings do the narration, so definitely gets my narration. But I'm going to go into the spoiler review now, so if you're still here, you've been warned. I'm going to get into some details. Not too deep, but I'm going to just kind of go over some of the stories and give my thoughts. With that out of the way, we'll start in with the beginning of the story, and it's, like I said earlier, Zee Natel is trying to track down the Millennium Falcon for an unnamed client. And she comes to find out that Hondo knows something about the Falcon's whereabouts, and so she tracks him down to Black Spire Outpost, and he's there at the cantina. And he's decided that he's going to make her sit through a whole bunch of stories so he can try and tell its fantastic tales of the Falcon and then drive up his asking price, because he's going to actually try and sell it to her. The first story is called A Ship to Remember, and it tells how Hondo essentially crash landed on a planet called Galagos 5. Not long after he gets there, he meets a woman named Majo Rilo, and he helps her get out of some trouble with some gangsters, and he kind of turns down her appeal for some additional help. He's looking for a new ship, and he happens to spy the Falcon, in the port, so he is trying to steal it when Han and Chewbacca show up. So he turns into a stowaway, and wouldn't you know it, they just happen to be doing a job. They're going to take Majo Relo to another planet, and so one thing leads to another, and he reveals himself because he believes he can be of an assistance on this. They go steal a device needed that's access codes, so they can get into these vaults on this planet that is called Gwajdeen. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's spelled Gwongdeen. And Majo has them all believing that they're going to be stealing these priceless Novian rubies, when in fact that's not at all what they're doing. At one point in her life, she was working for this rogue Kaminoan, and he has developed a bioweapon, and she hopes to get into these vaults and then use some defoliator technology to destroy the bioweapon. Of course, she had to betray Han, Chewbacca, and Hondo to do this, but everything works out for the best. They destroy the bioweapon, but unfortunately, it looks like Majo dies in the same ship as this Kaminoan. Good story. Again, it's got some twists and turns, a little bit of betrayal. No one gets the rubies. Han, Chewie, and Hondo depart with Han not being real happy how he got used in all this. The Gwajdeen is an interesting planet. It's kind of got a liquid, soupy type atmosphere, and then which is biological, and then parts of it open, and you descend into like an underlayer of the planet. And so it's kind of a neat twist on a Star Wars world. The virus that the Kaminoan is building, I don't know, it just kind of reminded me of the Blue Shadow virus episodes from the Clone Wars. And, it's a fun story. It goes by quickly, and then it sets up what else is to come. The Pachyphantos are debut in this part of the book, and they are gangsters that have it out for Hondo. A couple of them get trampled by the creatures that are back on Galagos 5. And there's some fun interaction there, but they were just a fun race. It was a great new addition to Star Wars. The second story is called Hondo and Maz Save the Day, and this takes place. You get the feeling sometimes right before The Force Awakens. Han and Chewbacca have been recruited by Maz to pose as people that are interested in parts, and because there are ships being stolen in the area around Takodana, and Maz can't stand for that happening on her planet. Unfortunately, Han and Chewbacca get abducted by this gang that's doing it. They're called the Hackjackers. So Hondo goes to try and steal the Falcon again, because just like Lando and Han, he's become enamored with this ship. But Maz shows up in the cockpit and basically coerces him into helping her find her boyfriend, which is amusing because Hondo misinterprets this that Maz is interested in Han. And when in fact we all know that Maz considers Chewbacca her boyfriend. But they do, they investigate, they end up in this chop shop, so to speak. And turns out that Hondo was the one that was trying to buy these parts, and he was not really aware that these hackjackers were stealing these ships from outside of Maz's castle, which creates a problem. But he kind of talks his way out of it. He ends up helping rescue Han and Chewbacca and Maz, and then the quartet then turns the day on these criminals, and they get the Falcon back and put them out of business. A good story. Again, it's considerably shorter than the first one. The Maz and Hondo team up is a lot of fun. I had a good time with that and got some good laughs. When Maz shows up in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon, she greets Hondo with the same way she did Han in The Force Awakens. So it's big Hondo Anaka, and then Hondo retorts with a Maz Ganada, and it's especially good on audio. So make sure you check that out. And then the third tale is called Attack of the Porgs, and I kind of get the feeling that this story was written before too much information about The Last Jedi was shared. But it's another good story by Lou Anders. It talks about how Hondo gets custody of the Falcon from Chewbacca because it needs some parts and a few repairs. And so he goes to pick up the planet. Rey gets mentioned in this. And Hondo notes that Han Solo has passed away, which kind of makes him sad. But he's unaware that the Porgs are on board. And so he goes back into the galley to make himself some dinner. and he's preparing some blue puff cubes in a fryer, and they keep getting stolen. And eventually he figures out that there's this porg infestation. They keep stealing this food. He doesn't get too much farther before Trunk, which is the leader of the Pachyphantos, catches up with him and boards the ship and puts him in a jail. But he cleverly uses the porgs to help him escape. He throws pieces of food on the locking mechanism, and they jump on it, and eventually it frees them. And these porgs have had so much food that their bellies get full, and bird droppings end up being a big part of the solution to his captivity. And so I don't know. I could probably have done without that part of it. I enjoyed the first two stories considerably more than the third one, but again, it is amusing. The thought of Hondo dealing with porgs was kind of fun, and he does give them all little cute nicknames and makes alliances with them. But so that's the end of his third story, and so then it's left for him to deal with Bazine Natal back on Black Spire Outpost. And so he asks for an exorbitant sum to sell the Falcon, and she agrees because it's not her money, and she was basically just under orders to acquire the Falcon at any cost. And so she agrees to pay it. Hondo turns over the ship, and at this point I was getting really confused. I thought, we're going to get the resolution to this in another book, because Flight of the Falcon, of which Pirates Price is an edition, is a series of books and comics. We covered this in the news on a prior episode of Starships, Sabers, and Scoundrels. And so I was fully prepared for this to get resolved in the next book or comic or something. But Bazine radios in to her client that she's got the Falcon and she's ready to turn it over. And so she does. She gets coordinates to where she's going to land on another planet. She does. She turns over the ship, and she asks for a ride back to Black Spire Outpost, but her contact says, "No, you've been well compensated. You can get your own ride." And the contact then flies the ship back to Black Spire Outpost and turns back over to Hondo. And it turns out that it's Majo. She did not perish in the earlier story, or after all, we're not exactly sure how she made her escape, but she did. The inference is that she's part of the Resistance, and she was kind of repaying Hondo for having betrayed him earlier. The credits that he made from this are enough to help him set up his new transportation service that he's trying to get going there on Galaxy's Edge. I kind of feel like perhaps this story really is some backstory into what Hondo is going to be doing in that theme park come this summer and later this fall in Walt Disney World. That we're going to see the Hondo Onaka's transportation agency, and he posts a help wanted sign that I could kind of see being the introduction to the Millennium Falcon ride at Galaxy's Edge. That he's looking for people to fly the Falcon and run some sort of mission for him, and you're answering that ad, and then the next thing you know, you end up on the Falcon and you run whatever mission this is. I don't know that any of these other characters, including the Pachyphantos or Majo or anyone else, are going to show up in Galaxy's Edge, or so that's just pure speculation on my part. But there you have it. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. It's a quick read. Don't let the junior grade designation put you off. If you enjoyed the books that led up to The Force Awakens, such as Before the Awakening, which had short stories that dealt with Rey, Finn, and Poe, or the other three books that dealt with Han, Luke, and Leia, such as Moving Target, Smuggler's Run, and Weapon of a Jedi. This is kind of in that same vein, that same tone. Those books were perfectly enjoyable and accessible by all ages. This is the same way. After I read this one, I went back and read the book that came before it in the series, which was Lando's Luck by Justina Ireland. Again, another good story. I'll save the discussion of that for a future day. But this is a series that I kind of was passing on at first, but I'm glad I picked this one up. The highlight of it was getting Jim Cummings reading it. If you're doing the audio version, I flip back and forth with the Whisper Sync function on Kindle. And so I read part of it and listened to part of it, and I couldn't get enough. I went through it really quickly. It's very digestible. But that's going to do it for my review of Pirates Price. I hope you enjoyed this. Sorry that Jay and Taxus couldn't be along, but they'll be back soon for another regular episode of Starship Sabers and Scoundrels. If you want to find more of Taxus, you can find him on the Geek Supreme, which has been on a little bit of a hiatus, but that's his Around the Horn style geek topic discussion show that he does with Scott Murray, Jeff McGee, and Regina Davis. Of course, you can always find Jay's archived blogs and Core World's Couture columns over on Coffee with Kenobi if you want to find out more from her. And make sure you go check out our Instagram feed. She kind of went through a project that she's been working on recently with a denim jacket and a bunch of fan patches. And that's going to get featured on an upcoming episode of That's So Wizard as well. If you want to find us on social media, you can find us at SQPod on Twitter and Instagram, and on Facebook at facebook.com/SQPod. You can email us at sqpod@retrozap.com. You can follow Darth Taxus on Twitter at Darth Taxus. Jay is at Joyce Krebs, and I am at DJKVER2. And if you want to find any more of my work, you can find my comic reviews over on RetroZap.com. I am each month on Jedi Journals with Jovial J. Shepard, discussing recent Star Wars trade paperback. We just did the Hope Dies story arc, which was a fun discussion. We had a good time talking about that. And then my wife and I are doing a Star Trek based show that is covering each episode of Discovery. And so with that having just come back, we fired that up again. So you can find that over on the RetroZap.com podcast network feed. Speaking of RetroZap, we are a proud member of the RetroZap.com podcast network. The network currently features more than a dozen shows covering everything from retro gaming and movies to the Animaniacs, collecting, Dune, Game of Thrones, and of course a ton of Star Wars. You can subscribe to the network feed and you'll get all the shows in one place. And I also would highly recommend the RetroZap Discord channel. Starships, Sabers, and Scoundrels has its own page there. There's been a lot of Resistance discussion going on there, some Celebration discussion. Each one of the RetroZap shows has their own page there, and so if you're interested in talking to the hosts, you can find them there. We also have a general discussion forum. We were just talking about some of the Marvel movies after I'd seen Thor: The Dark World the other night, and kind of how we rank them and what the tone of those movies are and how successful they've been. That was a fun discussion. So head over to there and check it out. You can find the link to that over on RetroZap.com. Well, that's going to do it for the Scoundrels Special Edition. I hope you enjoyed this really short episode. We'll talk to you soon with another edition of Starship Sabers and Scoundrels. Until then, may the Force be with you.